Well, let's join our US correspondent, James Matthews, who's in Beijing for us. Hello, James. Is it morning? Is it evening? I can't keep track with the time differences. Let's kick off with exactly what we're expecting from this trip. It was postponed already, wasn't it? And it's finally arrived.
Hi, Maria. Good to be with you. It's morning, I can tell you that. Kids are going to school. In fact, as I look down from this 20th floor balcony, I can see youngsters clearly in school in the backyard being given their morning exercise, prompted by teacher, presumably, on the loudspeaker. Beijing is waking up, much like any other day, but of course it is rather special because of the VIP guest who is in town. Headed to that place that you are looking at, the Great Hall of the People. That's the main political building. That's where the business of politics gets done in this city. And Donald Trump will meet President Xi there in around about half an hour. And you can see some of the ceremony being lined up. Youngsters will be waving flags, cometh they are. That was very much the scene last night at Beijing International Airport, Mary. I was there. It was in the darkness around 8:30. Air Force One landed and Donald Trump duly came down the staircase onto the red carpet, met by the Vice President, Han Zheng. Much interpretation of that. That's how it works here. The choreography, the cast list, people pour over it to try to get a sense of the importance of the guest. The word, or China watchers here, reckon that Han Zheng, Vice President, he's not involved in the nitty-gritty of politics here, doesn't do his politics in the Politburo, but he is more symbolic of the government. So in keeping with the choreography, the symbolism, the celebration of it all last night, but a message perhaps to Donald Trump: OK, we'll give you the big welcome at the airport, but when the politics start, then that's a different ball game altogether. It will be a tough game for Donald Trump, tougher than he has faced with the Chinese before. The last time he was here was 2017, of course, the president who prompted a trade war with the Chinese, and that has largely moulded Beijing's approach to relations with Washington. Donald Trump comes to a China that is more resilient, has grown a strategy of self-preservation when it comes to business, and that's what Donald Trump wants to tackle. In his second term of office, he put China at the heart of his tariff policy. Came into the White House saying he was going to hit China hard economically. Well, that hasn't worked out terribly well for him. China's retaliation has burned the US president. He comes here to build bridges, to find a way to do business, and we got a keen sense of that from the pictures at the airport, the people who came off Air Force One. Donald Trump travelled in the company of the very rich and the very powerful, the tech bros. He had a Team America travelling with him, and for Team America, read Tech America. You know, Elon Musk, Apple Chief Executive Tim Cook, the superstar CEOs of the United States, all coming to China to shore up their business interests. And I think that tells you a lot about where we are in US-China relations. Donald Trump has brought with him that power, that influence, the ultimate lobbying group to lean on the Chinese to say, look, we've had a good run. You've made us rich. You've made us powerful. We've done the same to you. We need to keep this relationship working. It's broken down as a result of Donald Trump's policies, frankly, and Donald Trump needs to find a way of shaping the relationship in the United States' interest. The White House coming into this is talking about a rebalancing of the relationship to restore US economic independence. That's a tough call for Donald Trump, face-to-face with President Xi, who has brought in a more resilient, a more defiant Chinese government, and is absolutely not as weak as the China that Donald Trump has dealt with in the past.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, James. I just want to pick up on something you were talking about in terms of Donald Trump being here almost 10 years ago. I mean, what a difference a decade makes. I mean, if we look at some of the rhetoric that's been coming out of the White House, coming out of Donald Trump on social media or talking to the press pack, I mean, it's been quite a lot of mixed messaging. Like you said just then, talking about how focusing on China in his second term, wanting to kind of potentially, bring them down a peg with some of those tariffs, but then that tit for tat started, them trying to use their critical minerals kind of muscle to fight back. It didn't really work out in the end for Trump, as you were just pointing out, James. And I think, I mean, some of the mixed rhetoric, it still even happened just a few hours ago when your colleague Mark Stone was talking to him before he was getting on the plane. He was asked about, whether or not he was going to get something from China on Iran. And first of all, he kind of said, yeah, we'll talk about it. Then he actually said, no, we're not really going to talk about it. And this seems to go back and forth. I mean, do you think the Chinese have kind of worked out Trump's game plan here? Or do you think that the fact that he is still quite unpredictable could be potentially a bit of a kind of trump card for him?
His lack of predictability is an issue in terms of trying to read him, read where he will try to take negotiations, frankly. But I think the Chinese learned a lesson that he is an erratic president on whom they cannot rely. There's no consistency, and there's certainly no shaping of the relationship in China's interests. This is an America first president who the Chinese have learned needs to be met with a China first philosophy. And they gave Trump a bloody nose when he put them at the bullseye of the tariff strategy. China's response was, fine, you're not having access to our rare earth minerals. They put export controls on that. That hurt Donald Trump, and he had to find compromise. That's why they have reached this truce on trade and on tariffs. Tariffs have come down on both sides. It was a deal signed in October, and actually, Mary, look for that to be an agreement that we might well see today. I mean, today is very much about pressing the flesh, looking each other in the eye, agreeing to move forward with cordiality, with an eye on a constructive relationship. So I'm not expecting any thunderous agreements to be made necessarily in the space of a couple of meetings. Today is about setting ground rules, just finding a platform from which to move on. But I think we could well see an extension of the trade truce because it is in the mutual interest. And mutual interest is very much at the heart of the message that's been sent to Donald Trump by the Chinese. Let me read you. There's a couple of sentences in this. It's from the Xinhua news agency, essentially a government mouthpiece. They say this, Mari, for some time certain practices by the US side on economy, trade, technology have brought interference and shocks to bilateral relations. As two major powers, China and the US, will have differences, but the resolution of differences absolutely cannot rely on unilateral pressure and hegemonic strong arming. The clear message to Donald Trump is, look, we have mutual interests. We can do business with you, but do not try to bully us. That's what Donald Trump is being told today. That's a lesson that he has learned from experience.
Indeed. Thank you, James Matthews, so much for joining us. We'll be back with him very soon. But next on Sky News, we'll have the latest, as we were saying, from that Donald Trump visit to China. Well, returning to our top story this morning, Donald Trump is set to meet Chinese leader Xi Jinping for a high-stakes and highly anticipated summit. The president's arrival in Beijing was greeted by children flanking the red carpet and waving Chinese and US flags. The two superpowers are set to talk tariffs and trade deals, plus the future of tech and AI. Crucially, though, Donald Trump needs China's help. He needs Beijing to convince their close allies, Iran, to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which has been logjammed for several weeks. Now, for China, Taiwan is top of their wish list, and the US president's backing for an invasion will be a public relations gift. Well, I'm joined now by Dr. Zhao Yukan, who is director of the Institute for Taiwan, Hong Kong and Macau Studies. Dr. Zhao, thank you so much for joining us. Just kick us off with the significance of this visit, really, and what we should be watching out for, keeping an eye out for.
First of all, thank you very much for having me. A lot of people would, especially from the United States, would call this summit meeting as a very symbolic one. Personally, I don't agree with this view. I think the meeting between the two presidents of China and the United States is very, very important because right now, at the current stage, the top-level exchanges between our two countries is the most important driving force to keep this bilateral relationship stable. And also this time, I think both two governments not only talk about stabilization of this bilateral relationship, but also they are talking about recalibration of this relationship. I think at least there are two dimensions of this recalibration. The first dimension is the goal of development of relationship between China and the United States. A lot of people in Washington talk about strategic competition, but right now, and also some people talk about a strategic decoupling. But right now, I think those people understand that this bilateral is very important for the United States. So they try to manage the differences and disputes between our two countries. On the Chinese side, I think we are thinking of the goal of our relationship with the United States is a peaceful coexistence, that the two countries their relationship is not who wins, who loses. It's very much more complicated. Actually, these two countries should work together to deal with the global challenges, which the world needs very much at the current moment. And the second dimension, I think, is the way of interaction. The Chinese government has repeatedly said that the United States should respect the Chinese political system, the Chinese path of development, not to interrupt in our own domestic politics. I think on these two levels, dimensions, if these two countries can recalibrate this bilateral relationship, the future would be a bit, I would say, cautiously optimistic. And also, I think this summit will pave the way for the next several rounds of high-level, top-level exchanges this year, because President Trump talked about 4 summits this year, right? And so after President Trump's visit to Beijing, I think President Xi would visit the United States later this year. And also there will be a G20 summit, APEC summit. So the two presidents will have other opportunities to meet with each other, which I think is very good for the stabilization of our bilateral relationship. Yeah.
Now, you talk about the recalibration of the relationship between the US and China and how it needs to be a peaceful coexistence. And from the Chinese perspective, that's what they're looking for. But if you kind of look under the surface for a moment, I mean, there's been a lot of the US accusing China, for instance, of kind of, stealing tech, AI tech, and not necessarily playing fair globally on some of those issues. We've had Donald Trump, saying one thing about how he's great friends with Xi Jinping one day, then the next day he changes and, mounts a trade war and slaps huge tariffs on China, which ended up escalating, didn't it? So I know that's what you say that China's looking for, but hold on a second, it doesn't actually look necessarily that everything between China and the US is rosy or is going to be rosy, surely?
Yeah, I agree with you. But I would say the Chinese government and also people like me, the researchers, analysts, we have got used to the Americans' approach and way to use unilateral sanctions, to use tool of tariff, to put a lot of pressure on the Chinese side and try to push Chinese government to change our policy. But I don't think this kind of approach has been effective. And I think the United States, Washington, and also the White House, they have understood that their policy has not been very successful. For example, the technology export control on Chinese AI, on other technology issues, I would say so far it has failed. If you look at the Chinese deep sea case and other high technology cases, the Chinese, we depend on ourselves and have made a lot of development. And it's really a rapid development, I would say. So that's why I said previously that the recalibration, why that dimension of that is the way how we should deal with each other. We should deal with the other side in a respectful way, not to use those sanction tools, tariff tools. It would only make this bilateral relationship deteriorate and not as stable as possible. So I hope that after this visit, of course, the situation will not change suddenly, just the day after the summit, everything will be good. Of course, it won't be that good, but that's what the Chinese are pushing, that we hope this bilateral relationship can move to a healthy direction. Of course, we understand it's very difficult, it's complicated. And also right now in Washington, I would say President Trump, he himself has his own view about China-US relationship, but there are other people within his administration and also in Washington's strategic community. They have different understanding comparing with President Trump's view. So that also complicates the U.S. policy toward China. Yeah.
OK, so let's just talk for a second about what the US and what China wants from this visit. I mean, Donald Trump is going to be looking, surely, for China to try and help him out when it comes to the blockade in the Strait of Hormuz and therefore the kind of oil crisis that has ensued because of it. I mean, from your perspective, how likely do you think it is that the Chinese might be willing to put some pressure on Iran and help out the US on that? And I suppose if they do, then at what cost?
Okay, first of all, I don't think Chinese government would stand together with the United States to put pressure on Iran because that's unfair to Iran. Of course, the closing of the Strait of Hormuz is not in the interest of China because China is a global trading country. And we have a lot of trading partners these days. Their economies have been impacted very negatively because of the closing of the strait. However, the United States launched a military operation against Iran, which is against the international law. So closing of the Strait of Hormuz is one of the tools in the toolbox of the Iranian government. So I think Chinese approach to solve the current intense situation in Middle East is we would try to facilitate negotiation. The Chinese government sent our special envoy to the region to talk to various stakeholders in Middle East. And also 7 days ago, the Iranian Prime Minister was in Beijing meeting with our Foreign Minister Wang Yi. And I think Wang Yi especially emphasized that at the current stage, it's very important for Iran to keep negotiation with the other stakeholders, with the United States. And also, Beijing is ready to facilitate, to mitigate the intense situation in the region. And also, Wang Yi raised the 3 steps to solve the current situation. The first step is de-escalation, try to lower the temperature. The second step is to achieve a ceasefire. The third step is to promote peaceful resolution. I think the Chinese way to deal with all those military conflicts is very different comparing with the United States. Yeah.
OK, Dr. Zhao, thank you so much for joining us. Now, joining me from Washington is Bob Davis, a former Wall Street Journal senior editor and co-author of Superpower Showdown, How the Battle Between Trump and Xi Threatens a New Cold War. Bob, thank you so much for coming back and joining us again. I wanted to just kick off with what our previous guest, Dr. Zhao, was just talking about. And she was arguing that the Chinese perspective and the Chinese ambition is a peaceful coexistence between the US and China. What did you make of that?
Honestly, what I made of it, I mean, it's this. I mean, who can argue that the two countries shouldn't, live in peace, right? I mean, it is the usual language that comes out of China that doesn't mean a heck of a lot, honestly. Yes, I think if you dig down into what the Chinese are looking for and also what the Americans are looking for is a stability in the relationship so we're not constantly at each other's throats. I think that is true on both sides, but, vague language about peaceful coexistence, again, who can argue against that? It's like, how do you actually achieve that? That's the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Dr. Zhao was also talking about, what the Americans might want from the Chinese when it comes to the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. And she was quite clear, really, that China's perspective was quite different on that conflict in the Middle East and their viewpoint in terms of what was illegal and the fact that they felt it was a breach of international law, what the US had done over there. And I suppose my question to you would be, do you think there's a way the US and China will be able to see eye to eye on this? Because from what Dr. Zhao was saying, it looks like the Chinese perspective on who's in the right and who's in the wrong is perhaps a bit different.
Well, I agree that the two countries disagree on who's at fault, basically. But I think I think from the U.S. perspective, the Chinese role isn't all that different from what she was talking about, is trying to get negotiations going and get the Strait of Hormuz open. I think from China's perspective, at the moment, things aren't going so badly, right? They have enough reserves, so they're not in a panic over oil at the moment. And the Americans are stewing, which is pretty much, I think, the way both the Iranians and the Chinese would like things to go at the moment. So there's no particular pressure at the moment on the Chinese to come to the aid, or it's not even coming to the aid of the Americans. It's the wrong way to think about it. It's coming to their own aid because they will at some point need that oil and will need, that straight channel of transportation opened up. It's just that they don't need it right at this, at this moment. And Donald Trump clearly, as you can see, day by day, is looking for a way out of this mess. So he's a much more vulnerable position at the moment than Xi Jinping and China is.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it looks that way, doesn't it? I mean, Donald Trump has been critical of the Chinese for not doing enough on Iran, and then simultaneously praising them for kind of getting Iran to the table. And he seems to kind of flip-flop with his position there. And I know the US trade representative spoke to journalists not too long ago where he said, we don't want this to be something that derails the broader relationship between the US and China. So I suppose My question is, when it comes to the US and China relationship, how damaging could the Middle East conflict be? Or is this really actually not necessarily the only centrepiece on the table?
Well, it's certainly not the only centerpiece on the table. I mean, if Iran is in, I mean, if China is in a deficit on oil, sure, that'll be a gigantic problem. But I don't honestly think it'll get to that point because the Iranians really need the Chinese support. And I imagine at some point, the strait will open up. I think the question, the way to judge it is when it does open up, is there a toll system? Do the Iranians, claim sovereignty, and do the Chinese back a claim of sovereignty? Because if they did, just for the sake of argument, if they did, well, then they could, make a claim of sovereignty, in the South China Sea. So, there's a lot of different, moving parts here. But I think, clearly at some point the strait's going to open up because it's in no one's interest to keep it closed all the time. It's like, who winds up looking like the victor. And I think the Iranians certainly are trying to embarrass and humiliate Donald Trump, who launched a war against them.
OK, just finally, I wanted to ask you, this trip is full of pomp and circumstance, full of pageantry, but with your eagle eyes, what would you be looking out for over the next 24, 48 hours on this trip that really could give us some kind of hints and indications of a way to read into how the trip is going and how the leaders are feeling, I suppose, if I can ask you that difficult question?
Well, one thing about Donald Trump is he doesn't hold back on talking to the press. I mean, he wars with the press constantly, but he talks to the press constantly also. So I think you'll get an idea, from either from him himself or from, the Secretary of State on the U.S. side. And I've been at some, including where, Trump in his first administration was in China, and sometimes it's actually interesting. Sometimes it's the Chinese that will be more forthcoming. But someone will be talking about, how things are going. We shouldn't only look at, China, at Iran and Taiwan, the most difficult issues. I mean, take a look if they cut a deal on trade, which I think is very possible. Both sides have been talking about what the Americans call a board of trade, a way of managing trade relations between the two countries where they agree perhaps on, the U.S. perhaps agrees on cutting tariffs on some imports from China that the U.S. is comfortable with. And China does the same in response. That in itself would be a step forward and something you can't underestimate how much Donald Trump cares about, trade and commerce. So that would be something to see. Whether that comes into being. If it doesn't come into being, because that's the low-hanging fruit, that would be a clear indication that things aren't going very well.
And when it comes to the trade that the US and, of course, China are going to want to try and secure on this trip, I mean, my question is, when you look at the guest list that Donald Trump is bringing with him, I mean, he's bringing some of the biggest, most powerful and rich people in the world. Elon Musk of Tesla and SpaceX, Tim Cook of Apple, the boss of Nvidia, the boss of Boeing. I mean, what does that guest list say to you or indicate to you about what Donald Trump is trying to achieve on this trip?
It's so interesting. I mean, it is so interesting and so ironic, right? This is a president who, in his first administration, turned the U.S. Approach toward China in a 180-degree move, so that the U.S. and China were at loggerheads, fought a trade war, came to some sort of deal, and then it all fell apart with COVID. So he more than anyone else is responsible and his supporters would say in a positive way, responsible for the U.S. taking a much more jaundiced view toward China and not only putting commerce first. And then on the other hand, now it's like something out of the Obama administration or the Clinton administration. He comes with, with all these high-powered executives to China. And these executives, I should add, are always, always, always the people that Xi Jinping and Li Chang, sorry, all the Chinese leaders use to lobby Washington, because of course they have enormous business interests in China. So, I mean, in some way, I suppose you could see it as an olive branch, because you know that these people will be looking, these executives will be looking for much easier relations with China, much more opportunities to sell things to China. And so it's kind of, again, in such a bizarre way. In the first Trump administration, you know, Trump was the China hawk. In this administration, he is, I think, the biggest China dove of his entire government. You know, it's really a remarkable, you know, change from a guy who is known for remarkable, you know, changes, of course.
Absolutely. Bob Davis, thank you so much for joining us. Now, we are going to go back to our US correspondent, James Matthews, who's in Beijing for us. James, thank you for coming back and joining us again. You know, we're expecting Donald Trump any minute now, aren't we? We're kind of waiting with bated breath. It was only, I think, last month Trump was posting on social media that Xi was going to give him a big fat hug. I mean, do you think we could see that in the next few minutes?
Well, who knows? There will certainly be a greeting of some warmth. Donald Trump, you know, he's been talking up the relationship, hasn't he? He speaks about his relationship with Xi as being very good, excellent. Whether that's reciprocated, we'll have to wait and see. I mean, President Xi is an inscrutable individual at the best of times. I don't expect any great show of public affection. And Trump, you know, won't want to be... he will be conscious of the optics in all of this. He doesn't want to be seen as the weaker partner in this superpower relationship. So in terms of that choreography, the photo opportunity, which we will see at the Great Hall of the People, then I suspect they will both want to play it straight. I'm interested in looking at the cast list, the gathering on the steps. I mean, it's quintessentially Chinese, isn't it, in terms of the military, straight-backed, straight-lined, the flags are out, there are young school children, and the American Party, if you look at them, you have that front row of the politicians: Pete Hegseth, Defense Secretary, Secretary of War; Marco Rubio, Secretary of State. But that second line, and you see them there: Tim Cook, Apple CEO; Elon Musk, CEO of SpaceX. I suspect he might be tweeting, Mari. He's been tweeting relentlessly since he got here, and a couple of minutes ago we saw him filming Tiananmen Square with his mobile phone. So you've got the tech bros in the row behind. Front row you have the politicians, and there you have the man, one of the men of the moment, President Xi, leader of China, coming down the steps as the motorcade with Donald Trump in the Beast rolls from his hotel in Beijing towards the Great Hall where politics is done in this city. It's just off Tiananmen Square. And interestingly, Donald Trump will likely, I think, drive down Chang'an Avenue, famous, notorious for the massacre that took place in that location in 1989. There were student protests, and the authorities massacred hundreds, possibly thousands. Nobody's sure of the exact number, but it has a haunted history, this place. And it's there on the steps of the Great Hall that the two superpower leaders will meet. And, you know, Chang'an Avenue, you might remember, Mari, a very famous photograph of Tank Man, that lone individual, a man carrying two plastic bags, who stood in front of the military tanks that were moving in to clear those student protests. A very famous news photograph. That's what happened there in the past. Fast forward to the present, it's all about the two superpowers, the world's two biggest economies, their two leaders, how they get on, the interpersonal relationship, and also the relationship between their two countries. The two biggest economies, it's the axis on which the global economy turns. So much depends on what happens over the next 2 days for the world at large. And there are key subject areas that they will want to explore. And there we see Donald Trump indeed. Yeah, that's Trump at speed. He overnighted in a hotel in Beijing. I'm not sure if these particular pictures have been fast-forwarded, Mari, but there is the man himself. That's real-time, live pictures from Tiananmen Square. Trump making his way towards the Great Hall of the People and making his way towards President Xi, who awaits him at the foot of the steps.
Absolutely, James. So, I mean, all these images are live that we've got at the moment and expecting Trump to step out of that car any moment now. I mean, the relationship between these two heavyweights, global heavyweights, cannot be overstated. Whatever they do and however their relationship transpires matters to everyone across the globe, not just the US, not just China. I mean, it is a really significant meeting, and 9 years on from the last time these two global leaders met, and it appears from what I guessed earlier, Bob Davis was saying, that actually Trump's view of China has gone from being very hawkish to actually being far more positive. I mean, what do you think on that?
I think he's absolutely right. As we watch the handshake, some warmth, some chat, no hugging, Mari. We spoke about that, but certainly men who have met before and seem pleased to see each other again. It's very businesslike, certainly. Not much smiling going on, but much as you would expect, I think, of men who have serious business to discuss, men who don't want to give anything away in that initial contact. And neither man, as we've discussed, wants a picture that makes him look like the junior partner, the weaker partner in this powerful relationship. Donald Trump being introduced to Chinese officials, a salute for the military man. The place is awash with military. That's been part of the welcome for Donald Trump. Chinese military here this morning. There were Chinese military at the airport last night, and very much an occasion of colour, a celebration of the visitor. I think what we're seeing now is the cold light of the morning in Beijing and the day when he meets the President of the United States, meets the key individuals, with Xi, the man at the centre of power in this country. And we will see the economic superpower arm wrestle. So much hinges on what comes out of the next couple of days. I mean, this is a meeting to build bridges. It is an initial contact in many ways on some of the key issues they have to address. As Xi meets David Perdue, the first man in that line, Ambassador Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, and Pete Hegseth, self-styled Secretary of War. Stephen Miller, part of the travelling party, Deputy Chief of Staff in the United States. And as he goes down the line, President Xi will meet Stephen Chung, White House Communications Director. That's the individual he's shaking hands with just now. He rather trolled President Xi, I thought, on X yesterday, posting a picture of Marco Rubio in a Maduro-type tracksuit. That's Eric Trump, son of Donald Trump. Many see him as the heir apparent. That may be why he's there. It may be because of family connections. It wouldn't be the first time Donald Trump has involved family members in foreign adventures to the financial benefit of the Trump family itself. And there we see the two men taking some shades as they watch the military lined up in formation.
I mean, James, there's
show
so much
of
pageantry,
Chinese
isn't there?
discipline
There is so
from Donald
much pomp and circumstance, pleasantries, handshaking and all of that. But at the end of the day, once they get down to business, these conversations are going to be tough, aren't they? They are going to be tough negotiations. Both sides are going to want to come out looking victorious.
Yeah, and I wonder what form victory would take. I mean, I think Donald Trump, there's every chance that he will claim a victory of sorts. That's how it will be packaged by the Americans. I think there's every chance that's how it will be packaged by both sides. The Americans, Donald Trump certainly on Truth Social, more elaborate, more showy in terms of his performance as president. So I would expect, if he is to behave in typical Trump fashion, we will have something of a running commentary in full from Donald Trump. I expect that to appear in time. From the Chinese, more reserved perhaps, but with no less prominent in terms of their messaging and their desire to get the messaging out. They do that through a number of means, state media. You don't get quotes from particular individuals necessarily. You don't see Truth Social tweets. But what you do get are usually lengthy statements of how the Chinese perceive events like this. So I would expect to see something like that. We certainly have seen it going into this meeting, talking about how, and I'm paraphrasing, how the Americans cannot twist China's arm in all of this. They have mutual interests in doing business together, and America needs to recognize that. But that's a lesson that Donald Trump has learned in the past. Donald Trump, certainly to my view, he's definitely receiving the higher end of the red carpet treatment, I would say, that China has to offer. This very much is the VIP package for the US president, which is symptomatic, I think, of the importance of the trip and China's perception of how important this is. It's also very probably part of this Chinese strategy. They will know that Donald Trump likes this treatment. They have seen him on different foreign adventures, and they have seen what works with Donald Trump. Celebration, displays like this, flattery. And I think there's every expectation that this is how they will package their welcome for Trump, and I think we see evidence of it here. The question, of course, as you say, Murray, comes behind the doors of that building. When the two men go inside, face each other across the table, that's when it gets down and dirty, and it gets to the subject matter, like Iran. Donald Trump, he's come into this meeting saying, look, we don't need China's help on Iran, but I think most observers would come to the conclusion that he very much does. You just have to look at what has been said in recent days by the likes of Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, appealing to the Chinese to lean on their friends in Tehran to enter diplomatic negotiations to bring about a reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, that's top of the agenda in all of this. There is an immediate concern for Donald Trump with regard to that. He's feeling the political heat at home. He's entered into a conflict that he cannot find a way out of, and he will look to that man walking by his right for help in that, despite the fact that he says he doesn't need China. The question to him will be, well, what are you going to do if not seek China's help? Because it's been 10 weeks and more, and he's struggling to find a solution to the Strait of Hormuz blockage, and struggling to find the exit door from that particular conflict. There you go. He likes that. Smiles from the US president as the youngsters enter the fray. Welcome, they are shouting to Donald Trump. We saw that last night. Welcome, welcome, warm welcome. That was the shout of students from Beijing universities yesterday school-age youngsters this morning, but no less enthusiastic.
Yeah.
Smiles and applause from the US president. And he seems to be enjoying the warmth of the Beijing welcome that he is receiving.
Absolutely, James. Thank you for joining us from Beijing. That was James Matthews, our US correspondent, live in Beijing for us. You're just seeing on your screens now as part of this arrival ceremony, President Xi Jinping with President Trump clearly enjoying that welcome from the children. They've got Chinese flags and US flags there as they welcome the US president. We're going to go back live to our guest in Beijing, Dr. Zhao Yuken. Thank you for keeping with us, Dr. Zhao. I just want to talk to you for a moment about one of our other guests who we just had on a few minutes ago. He was talking about how some of the potential trade agreements that could be reached would be considered low-hanging fruit. I mean, when it comes to this trip, this two-day trip for Donald Trump here in Beijing, I mean, what's your perspective on the kind of easy wins, as it were, for both sides? And what do you think are the more thorny, more difficult wins that might be quite difficult to negotiate?
First of all, I think the so-called easy or easy ways to get. Of course, I think the priority for both Beijing and Washington is trade issue, right? And we try to extend the ceasefire of the trade disputes, so of the tariff. So this is the most important thing, I think. And the second is, I guess, Washington wants very much that China purchases the U.S. agriculture products, energy products, all those things. So this is, I guess, it's one of the outcomes that very possible to happen to get. And another complicated issue is the so-called Chinese investment in the United States. President Trump, he himself very much wants to have this. But in Washington and in some states within the United States, I think the attitude is not very positive. So Washington says that through this summit, through this visit, there will be two mechanisms established. One is Board of Trade, the other is Board of Investment. I think if there are some mechanisms like these two has been built, that will be good for stabilizing of trade and economic relationship between our two countries. And because my impression is previously the Trump administration was not interested in building mechanisms for dialogues between our two countries, especially they were not interested. They are not interested to use the mechanisms that were built by the Biden administration. So if these two mechanisms can be built this time, that will be good. And other things, I think, from Beijing's perspective, it's for sure President Xi Jinping will raise the Taiwan question. This is the most important and sensitive issue in China-U.S. bilateral relationship. And right now, the Trump administration last year, at the end of last year, had passed a very big military package to Taiwan, which Beijing opposed fiercely. And so this topic for sure will appear in the summit. And if the Trump administration continues to send other big package, military package to Taiwan and try to strengthen their military ties with Taiwan, Beijing will have very stronger countermeasures on the United States. And other issues like AI, so-called those global challenges, Iran, AI, and also climate change, I think. These kind of issues, so-called global challenges, the Chinese side will raise these topics, but I don't know whether they will have agreement. I guess possibly very difficult, but they need to talk with each other about that. And the other thing is that we have noticed that the Defense Minister Hexes is also in the group. I hope that there will possibly be kind of a male-to-male relations, those topics that can be included, but I don't think there will be specific outcomes coming out of this summit. But anyway, if they are talking with each other, that's a good news. Yeah.
Yeah, so you talk a lot about Taiwan, and you know, some of our guests have been explaining some of the significance and obviously the Chinese perspective and the US perspective, very, very, very different. Now, the US position has always been this kind of strategic ambiguity when it comes to Taiwan. And you were talking about, you know, the US arms sales to Taiwan, that aid package, and you said Beijing countermeasures potentially on the US if the US were to kind of follow through with that package. I mean, talk to me a bit more about that and what you would expect Beijing perhaps to do or to consider doing even.
I would say, just as you said, that the U.S. policy is strategic ambiguity, right? But these days, I think, actually, the U.S. policy is one China policy. Beijing's policy is one China principle. They're different, but there is same part. It's one China. It's one China. But right now, I think the Washington is trying to hollowing out the one China policy. And Beijing has already taken strong countermeasures. For example, Beijing has put sanction on some defense companies in the United States who sell whose weapons. The weapons that made by those companies were sold to Taiwan, and so this kind of sanctions will continue if the Trump administration is going to send another big military package to Taiwan. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose then, you know, that's the China perspective on that. But for the people of Taiwan, many of them who believe, you know, that it's not part of China and it's a separate entity in itself, I mean, surely any softening of that, you know, rhetoric or even a nod toward that from the US and from Trump would be a huge concern for many people in Taiwan.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Actually, I would say, first of all, as you said, there are some people, they don't think Taiwan is a part of China, but I would say a lot of people, they have been educated by the Taiwan authorities that Taiwan is not a part of China. And if you read those history textbooks, those other textbooks, that they would try to, the Taiwan authority, the DPP authorities would try to change the history, the real history. And so it's the education problem. And also, if you read the recent poll in Taiwan, it's a big change.
Okay, let me just push you back on that for a second, because you know, your argument is that people in Taiwan have been educated that Taiwan is not a part of China, but their argument would be the absolute opposite, that people in China have been educated that Taiwan is part of China. So you can see why actually you can just flip that argument on its head immediately, no?
Right, but if you go to the international law, if you go to the United Nations, Taiwan is a part of China. So that's the thing. A lot of the Western observers, they don't think Taiwan is a part of China because they don't read the Chinese history. It's complicated, but you need to learn and study the history. Then you can have a kind of a correct image. And also, I would say that I mentioned the recent poll in Taiwan. The new chairwoman of Kuomintang, the opposition party, the biggest opposition party in Taiwan, she recently visited Beijing, the mainland, and met with President Xi Jinping. And after her visit, when she went back to Taiwan, the poll has shown there are more than 22% of the Taiwan people, which means 4 million of Taiwan people support one country, two systems, peaceful reunification, and one country, two systems. If there's going, if that can avoid a war between the two sides across the strait. So the so-called people's mind changed rapidly. Right now, the mainland's policy is not to take Taiwan back by military means. It's trying to have the integrated development between the two sides across the strait. We try to have more Taiwanese to come to the mainland, to live here, to work here, to study here, to understand what the political system here is in the mainland, and try to have their own perception. And if you like it, you can stay here. If you don't like, you can go back to Taiwan. It's free. So I think it's important for the two people on the two sides across the strait
Dr.
to build
Zhao,
a common memory.
we are going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. We're going to go live to what is looking like the meeting room where Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping will be speaking, and we'll be bringing those images to you live. Now, let's bring in James Matthews while we wait for those leaders to kind of file in and get themselves settled. I mean, James, I didn't have time to come back enough really on Dr. Zhao for a moment there, but she was talking about the Chinese perspective on Taiwan and the fact that they believe that China is the kind of mainland here. And what I was trying to argue is, of course, people in Taiwan would absolutely dispute that. And this is exactly a demonstration of how difficult some of these conversations are going to be about Taiwan between the US and China.
Yes, Mari, I think you're right. I think people in Taiwan will be watching this through their fingers, frankly. They look at Donald Trump and they see a president who has been less committal to Taiwan's defense than his predecessors. Marco Rubio, incidentally, Secretary of State, he seems impressed with the surroundings. Interestingly, Mari, and we'll come back to Taiwan, but Rubio, he's actually been sanctioned twice by the Chinese, and the sanctions include being barred from entry. The way they have got round this to enable the Secretary of State of the United States to be in that room is the Chinese have tweaked the spelling of his surname. So essentially they've adjusted the paperwork. That has enabled him to join Pete Hegseth, Secretary of War, Stephen Miller, his president, when Donald Trump arrives in the room, having climbed those stairs. Scott Besant, you can see central frame, speaking to David Perdue, the US ambassador to China, waiting for the president's arrival. He did have quite the show, didn't he? Top-level stuff from the Chinese, with the involvement of school children shouting, welcome, welcome, warm welcome. A display by the People's Liberation Army Honor Guard Battalion, and there he is, Donald Trump, in the room for discussions with President Xi of China. The superpowers come together for a meeting that is super important for all number of reasons. We spoke about Iran, Mari, and I do wonder if the Chinese help out Donald Trump on Iran, on clearing the blockage in the Strait of Hormuz, what is the payback? The question in Taiwan is, does that rebound on us? Does Donald Trump trade political capital over Taiwan in return for favors, Chinese favors on Iran? Donald Trump, as I said, he doesn't appear as committed as his predecessors have been to Taiwan's defense. Biden, Bush before him, made it clear they would come to Taiwan's defense if China attacked. Donald Trump, not so much.
James, we are just going to cut away for a moment because I think we are going to get some live audio from this meeting with some live translation from the two presidents, President Trump and President Xi Jinping. So we're going to try and listen in.
会面现在可以说是举世瞩目。当前百年变局大势，国际形势变乱交织，世界走到新的时空。中美两国能不能跨越所谓的休息？
Well, We're just going to wait for that translation to get set up so we can understand what is being said here. But you can see they've all got their earpieces in, presumably, so they can hear the live translation. You've got those live images of not just President Trump, but also Pete Hegseth on your screen there, the Defense Secretary for the US, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, of course, the US President there as well, Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, and all the top team there. We're going to wait until we can get the English translation of this meeting, where we can then really be a fly on the wall for this. But as James was just outlining, some of the difficulties, of course, in the discussions that are going to be having in the next day or two between the US and China, and how, of course, both sides are going to try to jostle and push for other things that are in their interest. Let's see if we can listen now, and see if we've got the translation.
Yeah.
I always believe that our two countries have more common interests than differences. Success in one is an opportunity for the other. And a stable bilateral relationship is good for the world. China and the United States both stand to gain from cooperation and lose from confrontation. We should be partners, not rivals. We should help each other succeed and prosper together, and find the right way for major countries to get along well with each other in the new era. Mr. President, I look forward to our discussions on major issues important to our two countries and the world, and working together with you to set the course for and steer the giant ship of China-US relations, so as to make 2026 a historic landmark year that opens up a new chapter in China-US relations. I will pause here and hand over to you, Mr. President. Thank you.
Well, President Xi, I want to thank you very much. First of all, that was an honor like few have ever seen before. And I think I was particularly impressed by those children. They were happy. They were beautiful. The military is obvious. It couldn't be better, but those children were amazing, and they represent so much. And I know they represent so much to you. You and I have known each other now for a long time. In fact, the longest relationship of our two countries that any president and president has had. And that's, to me, an honor. We've had a fantastic relationship. We've gotten along. When there were difficulties, we worked it out. I would call you, and you would call me. And whenever we had a problem, people don't know, whenever we had a problem, we worked it out very quickly. We're going to have a fantastic future together. Such respect for China, the job you've done. You're a great leader. I say it to everybody. You're a great leader. Sometimes people don't like me saying it, but I say it anyway because it's true. I only say the truth. And I just want to say on behalf of all of the great delegation that we have the greatest businessmen, the biggest, and I guess the best in the world. We have amazing people, and they're all with me. Every single one of them, we asked the top 30 in the world, every single one of them said yes. And I didn't want the second or the third in the company. I wanted only the top. And they're here today to pay respects to you and to China. And they look forward to trade and doing business. And it's going to be totally reciprocal on our behalf. So I really look very much forward to our discussion. It's a big discussion. There are those that say this is maybe the biggest summit ever. They can never remember anything like it. I can say in the United States, people aren't talking about anything else. But it's an honor to be with you. It's an honor to be your friend. And the relationship between China and the USA is going to be better than ever before. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So those were the remarks from both leaders, President Xi Jinping and also President Trump. Now, what was interesting was President Trump said it was a landmark year, opening up US-China relations. That was the perspective. And also he talked about how he liked the children, they looked happy. He noted that military presence there and how kind of impressive it was, I suppose. And he says we're going to have a fantastic future together. He says it's the biggest summit ever. And in the US, people aren't talking about anything else. And I think that might be a bit of a stretch, but nonetheless, classic Trumpian style there in terms of the rhetoric and the hyperbole about how amazing this is. But nonetheless, it is significant, and it is the first bilateral meeting between a US president and a Chinese president for 9 years. And the last time it was, of course, Donald Trump himself in 2017. And I think what was really interesting about that was Trump was very, very complimentary. He was very positive about the US relationship with China and how much they're looking forward to discussing trade and their relationship going forward. Of course, now we are waiting to see what comes out of this meeting. The rhetoric is one thing, the actions and the actual proof of the pudding is in the eating, of course. But nonetheless, I mean, the messaging between those two leaders was very warm, very friendly, and essentially, let's get down to business and see what we can do for each other and ourselves, I suppose. Now, those are the images you're just seeing on your screen there from the latest moments in that meeting, that expanded bilateral meeting between President Xi Jinping and President Trump. Let's go back to Beijing with our US correspondent, James Matthews, who's been waiting for us there. James, I mean, what did you make of those remarks and what the two leaders were saying to one another? What did you glean from that?
I was struck by how effusive Donald Trump was in complimenting President Xi. I mean, talking up their relationship as old buddies. And I can hear that voice in President Xi's head saying, hang on a minute, are you the same guy who, when you first came to power, launched a trade war against this country, who tried to strong-arm China into a submission that benefited your country and certainly didn't mine? You know, and then, of course, in the intervening years, Mari, China has learned lessons, has become more resilient, defiant, assertive in its dealings with the United States. That's the wider context to all of this. And fast forward to today, and we have a US president who could not be more complimentary. Let's go to, well, let's just look at what Xi had to say to him, talking about as the once-in-a-century transformation accelerates and the international landscape, he said, is marked by both change and turmoil. The world once again stands at a crossroads. Certainly, he's talking up the importance and significance of this meeting. Can China, he said, and the United States transcend the Thucydides trap? I may have mispronounced that, Mary. And establish a new paradigm, he said, for relations between major powers. Can we join hands, he said, to tackle global challenges and inject greater stability into the world? Can we, he said, with the well-being of our peoples and the future of humanity in mind, jointly forge a bright future for our bilateral relations? These are questions posed by history, by the world, and by the people. They are also the answers to the challenges of our time, and the leaders of major powers must jointly provide. He spoke about looking forward to working together with Trump to steer the giant ship of US-China relations. A stable bilateral relationship, he said, would be good for the world. We should be partners, not rivals. So that was the message from Xi to Trump, very direct and setting out a platform for building relations as he sees it. Donald Trump, more colourful in his language, certainly more affectionate, that's for sure. I mean, he spoke about his reception. Clearly, he was touched by it, tickled by it. The military can't be better, but it's the children, he said, that obviously hit home with him. He said, we've known each other a long time, the longest president to president relationship that there had been in US-China history. You are a great leader. People don't like me saying it, but it's the truth. The top 30 businessmen are here to pay their respects to you in China, he said, to do business. Some say it's maybe the biggest summit ever. In the US, people aren't talking about anything else. I can tell you, Mary, I've just come from the US, and they're talking about much beyond this particular summit. Trump finished by saying it's an honor to be with you, to be your friend. The relationship between US and China is going to be better than ever before. So there you go. An effusive Donald Trump. That is the way he speaks, to be fair. And we have heard him strike that tone, use that kind of flowery, affectionate language. So that's not a first by any means from Donald Trump. Yeah. But in this context, in this meeting, in that room, I just wonder about the tone that he has struck as he faces very tough negotiations moving forward. If that's the tone that he carries through this discussions today and tomorrow, it may be that some wonder about the content, about what he has to offer President Xi, if that is a sense of how he is approaching their relationship. Talked up as very warm, talked up as old friends. I'm not sure that that's the way President Xi sees it. Of course, it may be very different when the cameras are away from the room, but what it definitely does do is give us a sense of the Trump approach in this. Trump, the China hawk in his first term, Trump who returns to Beijing as the China healer. He needs to build bridges, to heal relations, to earn the trust of the United States, to interact in a constructive way on business terms and on matters such as the Iran war, such as avoiding any kind of conflict around Taiwan.
Yeah,
so he needs
James,
to move forward in a constructive way. One wonders whether he went just a tad too far in terms of the opening exchanges.
Yeah, we'll have to see, I suppose. Let's see what comes out of the next 24 hours, James. Thank you so much for sticking with us, James. Now, we're just going to go over to Dr. Oriana Schuyler Mastro, Centre Fellow and Director of the Indo-Pacific Policy Lab for the Freeman Splodge Institute for International Studies at Stanford University. Thank you so much for joining us. I don't know if you managed to catch some of those opening remarks there between the two leaders, and if you did, what did you make of it?
Well, there was nothing surprising about those opening remarks, right? Xi Jinping had already something extremely scripted in which he's talking kind of in code about the new era. All of that is saying that, China's rising, is going to be the new great power. The United States basically has to learn to live with that, but it's said in a very pleasant, diplomatic, and indirect way. And then President Trump comes in with what seemed to be a little bit of that off-the-cuff style of his first impressions that were mainly very personal, right? It wasn't really about the role of the United States in the world or even U.S.-China relations, but about how important he was and how important his relationship was. And of course, putting the business and econ relation first with bringing those 30 business leaders with him. So they seem to be off to the start that everyone thought they would, of Xi Jinping sort of playing things a little bit close hold, Donald Trump being very effusive about trying to reset this relationship moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of those opening remarks from Trump, James was just outlining there how warm they were, how, maybe would have raised some eyebrows. I mean, he was talking about how, nobody realises how, kind of close we are and we ring each other all the time, we fix problems over the phone. I mean, I don't know if Xi Jinping would want that to necessarily be characterised in that way, but I suppose it maybe suggests that actually Donald Trump wants something from China at the moment on this trip, and therefore is trying to use flattery as much as possible, perhaps to, warm up that relationship and potentially try and let that introduce the tone that is, please help me with the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, business negotiations are very different than geopolitics. In the econ sense, the world that President Trump is more used to, it's very a win-win, right? Positive sum situation. You can make some money, I can make some money if we have this deal. But when it comes to geopolitics, there's a lot of issue areas in which China and the United States have a conflict of interest. And if China makes advancements towards their objectives, it means the United States has a hard time making advancements towards theirs. And so this type of what I would consider a more business approach of, let's set the stage, let's have a banquet, let's have some drinks, we're going to be friends, so maybe we can sign a deal later. It doesn't actually really get at the heart at some of the more difficult situations that China and the United States is facing, such like, over Taiwan or even the U.S. War in Iran.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's difficult, isn't it? Because on one hand, the rhetoric is very positive, and it looks like, if you just listen to those few words from the leaders, it all sounds it's going to be tickety-boo. But nonetheless, as you say, there are lots and lots of thorny issues that both sides are going to want to deal with and discuss, and are not going to necessarily see eye to eye very, very easily. I mean, if we're just talking about trade, for instance, let's not forget it wasn't that long ago that Donald Trump basically waged a trade war on China that escalated, ended up being a tit-for-tat situation. China then trying to weaponize its monopoly on rare earth minerals, for instance. And so, actually, how realistic do you think it is that some of this, what other people have said is kind of low-hanging fruit in terms of the trade negotiations that might happen, could actually come to fruition? Or do you think we're all being far too optimistic about that?
Well, at the very least, people don't have the expectation anymore that if we have some agreements with this, low-hanging fruit, things are a bit easier, that will build trust between the two sides and make it easier for us to address the more thorny issues. I think decades and decades of diplomacy with China demonstrates that that's not really the case. I think that it's very clear that President Trump wants this reset with China. He is signaling to Xi Jinping that he wants to be able to say that this summit went well. And so, to a certain degree, that suggests that regardless of how things go behind closed doors, President Trump, like he said, they have the best relationship ever, the longest relationship. No one's talking more about this summit. They're not talking about anything else. I think kind of regardless of what happens behind closed doors, we're still going to see that very positive spin for the public coming out of it. And whatever the United States manages to agree to in the realm of trade and in economics, even if it's not enough, even if it's just a commitment to do something that then China doesn't really fulfill in the end, the Trump administration is going to present it to the world as a win.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. But both sides are going to want to try and at least sell whatever happens as a win. I mean, finally, just a final question for you. When it comes to the next 24, 48 hours, what are you looking out for specifically that would give you an indication of what has happened and how some of those negotiations behind closed doors will have gone?
Honestly, I'm looking a bit less at how the negotiations go between China and the United States. And I'm very interested in how China is positioning itself vis-a-vis the United States to enhance its role in the world overall. Like, how are they going to leverage or spin whatever happens at this summit in their discussions with U.S. partners and allies, in their discussions with countries in the developing world, to try to get a leg up in those relationships, whether it be in trade or security, that they can go back and say, well, listen, the United States and China, we're now on the same page about some of these things, so you should get in line too. Or, the United States and China, we have a good economic relationship, so you should feel comfortable investing in China, more and more. So I'm very curious with how the rhetoric and what the next steps are going to be with China in terms of how they leverage this summit to improve their position in relationships with other countries.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Oriana Schuyler Mastro.
Thank you for having me.
Well, next on Sky News, we'll have more, of course, on Donald Trump's visit to China. Well, we're going to stick with our top story, which is Donald Trump, the US president, on his visit to Beijing. He's currently in a bilateral meeting with the Chinese President Xi Jinping, of course, and we just had those live images of him arriving and having those opening remarks between the two leaders. Let's go back to Beijing and speak to our US correspondent, James Matthews, who's there for us. James, thanks so much for sticking with us. I mean, for a second, when it comes to those opening remarks, I mean, you were talking about how almost intimate they were, weren't they, in terms of, you know, Donald Trump using his usual hyperbole, basically saying, me and Xi Jinping, you know, we ring each other all the time, we're good friends, we fix our issues together. I mean, what did you make of the tone there? Is that really Donald Trump buttering up the Chinese to try and get what he wants, or is that just kind of classic Trump?
I think it's typical Trump. I mean, he is a man prone to hype, prone to over-affection. He's a businessman, you know, and he wrote the book, The Art of the Deal, and the art of the deal in his book is flattery, buttering up the man sitting across the table, man or woman sitting across the table from you. And that's, you know, that in large part actually is an American thing, isn't it? You know, words that don't necessarily carry the weight in the United States as perhaps they do here, and maybe that's a danger. But, you know, Mary, we've seen the first couple of minutes of this meeting. Clearly, things will get more serious as they begin to engage properly. But I'm somewhat surprised. Donald Trump, a man who is so attuned to the optics of an occasion like this, to be seen to be the partner in this superpower relationship that is flattering, that is seen to be the more effusive, the more complimentary. I do wonder how that plays with the wider audience, given that this is all about, you know, who's the daddy. This is about an arm wrestle of the superpowers, and it's important for those individuals in terms of their audiences at home. It's certainly important to Trump back in the United States. It's important to him to be seen as walking into that room and carrying the authority of a president who can leave that room with what he wants, with his interests preserved. There was something interesting from President Xi, actually, and words perhaps mean more. They're scripted more carefully by the Chinese than perhaps they are by the US president. And there was something interesting that struck me about Xi, this metaphor about a once-in-a-century transformation. He rolled that out once again. It's a refrain frequently used by him in recent years, but there's a contrast between its use with Putin and its use with Trump. He met Putin in 2023. When saying goodbye, he famously said to Putin, right now there are changes the like of which we haven't seen for 100 years. We are the ones driving these changes together. That sounded like a solid friendship. Contrast that with what he said to Donald Trump. He said this: as the once-in-a-century transformation accelerates and the international landscape is marked by both change and turmoil, the world once again stands at a crossroads. So a contrast in content and in tone there, I think. That's Xi standing shoulder to shoulder with Putin. That's also Xi looking at Trump and telling him, listen, we're facing once in a generation, once in a century transformation, and it's important that we get through it. But he's not necessarily classifying Donald Trump as his partner in that particular process. So interesting, bearing in mind that the Chinese think very carefully about every last word that is uttered between that pair. Certainly the opening script that is spoken by their president, perhaps it characterizes the way that Xi is approaching this, keeping Trump at arm's length, viewing him not as a bosom buddy in transformational change, but very much as the adversary he has been throughout his presidency in terms 1 and 2. And I think that underpins these talks, that mistrust that will never disappear. China had its fingers burned by Donald Trump in his first term, and it stood up to Trump. It has learned how to handle him to a large degree. And that's why they are where they are, in a situation where they have to come together to interact and to build a relationship that had broken down. There is an uneasy peace between the two. They will talk about trade, where they go from here. They will talk about probably extending the trade truce, tariffs, they're on pause. I expect that to continue. There's talk about boards of trade, boards of investment. I can see that being in the wish of the Americans, essentially to keep an eye on the business that is done between these two countries, bearing in mind the mistrust. So I expect that might be a quick result today, but in terms of the bigger picture and the bigger challenges, that may take some time. More meetings like this, possibly in Washington later this year. That's where Xi is headed for the return meeting. But on Iran, on key subject areas like Taiwan, that's going to take time. Certainly on Taiwan, Mari, it's an incremental process for the Chinese. They're not in a hurry. They are pursuing a policy of patience politically when it comes to Taiwan's unification. And what they would be looking for, I think, is a change in the conversation, a change in the framing of it from Trump's point of view. That phrase, America does not support Taiwanese independence. We've heard that. I do wonder if we will hear a change in that. Does Donald Trump emerge from this meeting saying that he is opposed to Taiwanese independence? That would be a difference in language. It would be a significant shift, and it would shift the starting point for future discussions on Taiwan. That's what the Chinese are after from Donald Trump, and that's something to look for going forward.
Yeah, absolutely, James. I mean, we just had a guest on who was talking, kind of outlining how much there were conflicts of interests between, you know, the US and China, and how actually finding a way to make a deal isn't as easy as Trump makes out, because this isn't just business. And actually, what she was arguing was if one nation gets what they want and does well, inevitably the other nation doesn't. And I suppose, therefore, actually, with these two superpowers, this isn't just a typical business deal that Donald Trump perhaps is used to doing. This is geopolitics, this is diplomacy, and this is, therefore, it is more complicated, isn't it?
It is, and that is very much the bigger picture in terms of how the tectonic plates shift geopolitically, because China is exploiting America's difficulties over Iran and the general difficulties that the United States faces,
James,
in terms of
we are going to have to leave it there. I'm so sorry we've run out of time.
Competition.
Well, next on Sky News, we'll have more on Donald Trump's visit to China, where the two leaders have just met. Good morning. Well, Donald Trump and Xi Jinping have begun their highly anticipated summit in Beijing with plenty of pomp as the leaders of the two superpowers came together. Well, it all began with a handshake as the Chinese president extended his hand to Trump at the foot of the stairs to the Great Hall of People. Xi Jinping then led Donald Trump past a military formation on their way inside, and the pair then exchanged warm remarks to begin the summit.
This year is the 250th anniversary of American independence. Congratulations to you and to the American people. I always believe that our two countries have more common interests than differences. Success in one is an opportunity for the other, and a stable bilateral relationship is good for the world. China and the United States both stand to gain from cooperation and lose from confrontation. We should be partners, not rivals. We should help each other succeed and prosper together and find the right way for major countries to get along well with each other in the new era. Mr. President, I look forward to our discussions on major issues important to our two countries and the world, and working together with you to set the course for and steer the giant ship of China-U.S. relations so as to make 2026 a historic landmark year that opens up a new chapter in China-U.S. relations. I will pause here and hand over to you, Mr. President. Thank you.
Well, President Xi, I want to thank you very much. First of all, that was an honor like few have ever seen before. And I think I was particularly impressed by those children. They were happy. They were beautiful. The military is obvious. It couldn't be better, but those children were amazing, and they represent so much. And I know they represent so much to you. You and I have known each other now for a long time. In fact, the longest relationship of our two countries that any president and president has had. And that's, to me, an honor. We've had a fantastic relationship. We've gotten along. When there were difficulties, we worked it out. I would call you, and you would call me. And whenever we had a problem, people don't know, whenever we had a problem, we worked it out very quickly. We're going to have a fantastic future together. Such respect for China, the job you've done. You're a great leader. I say it to everybody. You're a great leader. Sometimes people don't like me saying it, but I say it anyway because it's true. I only say the truth. And I just want to say on behalf of all of the great delegation that we have the greatest businessmen, the biggest, and I guess the best in the world. We have amazing people, and they're all with me. Every single one of them, we asked the top 30 in the world, every single one of them said yes. And I didn't want the second or the third in the company. I wanted only the top. And they're here today to pay respects to you and to China. And they look forward to trade and doing business. And it's going to be totally reciprocal on our behalf. So I really look very much forward to our discussion. It's a big discussion. There are those that say this is maybe the biggest summit ever. They can never remember anything like it. I can say in the United States, people aren't talking about anything else. But it's an honor to be with you. It's an honor to be your friend. And the relationship between China and the USA is going to be better than ever before. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, joining me now is Chairman of the Harvard China Fund, William Kirby. William Kirby, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you managed to just watch that clip we were playing a couple of moments ago. What did you make of those opening remarks from the two leaders? I mean, Donald Trump there basically saying President Xi's a great leader, even though people don't like him saying it. Did you find that surprising?
No, I think there's very little that President Trump would do that would surprise me. But I think President Xi began by discussing the interests of the two countries and how they were more in parallel than in conflict from his point of view. And President Trump talked above all about the personal relationship between the two leaders. There are different ways of managing international relations, and both of those approaches are extremely important. Countries do have permanent interests, but the activities and actions of individual leaders also matter enormously. So I think no matter, despite all of the negativity that one reads, particularly in the American press about this visit, I think it's a very good thing that the President of the United States and the President of China are meeting. Much better than not to meet.
Okay, so when it comes to what you've been talking about in terms of some of the coverage in the US media, for instance, there's been a lot of talk about the power balance between these two global superpowers here, and the fact that many people have argued Donald Trump is weakened really in his position by what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz and the conflict ongoing in the Middle East, even though of course there is a ceasefire, that the oil catastrophe is not over. I mean, what's your perspective on that? Did you glean anything from those opening remarks in terms of that power balance between those two men?
No, I not from those opening remarks. Very professional and very predictable on the part of President Xi, and also on the part of President Trump. There are certain areas, without question, in which the United States has put itself into an unenviable position by beginning this war with Iran without a clear outcome. But on the issues that are first and foremost in President Trump's mind, which have, as usual, to do mostly with trade, not so much with geopolitics, at least that's the agenda as he has set it out for this meeting, I think that's not entirely separable from the power political relations, but it has a logic of its own. And if the United States and China can begin on that front to have a more professional and more predictable relationship in our trade one with another, then that can set a standard for other areas in which we need to cooperate. It's the volatility and the unpredictability, particularly of American policy, that have done so much to destabilize this relationship in the last year and a half.
Well, I suppose then you talk about the volatility and then the unpredictability of the Trump administration, essentially. And James Matthews, our US correspondent, a few minutes ago was just talking about how China has had their fingers burned before by the US. So I suppose the question might be, what would incentivise China to trust the US this time? What would incentivise China to trust the US as a kind of predictable partner when so far there's been a lot of unpredictability?
Well, I think one would have to go back to the first Cold War and the lessons, for example, in the nuclear treaties between the United States and the Soviet Union. The phrase then was trust, but verify. And to ensure that a deal, as President Trump likes to say about international agreements, that a deal is actually kept, and indeed by both sides. In the first Trump administration, there was an agreement between the United States and China that both sides, not just the American side, did not fully adhere to. And I would hope that in this case, you would have something that would stick and not be renegotiated within 3 to 6 months period of time. Then the goodwill and the resetting of the mood of the relationship, which is really what this visit is all about, then this will have been wasted, a wasted opportunity. I hope that won't be the case.
So trust but verify. I mean, it's an interesting line there. When it comes to trust between these two leaders, though, it appears that their relationship really has evolved over the years. We've had several guests on so far this morning talking about how Donald Trump's position to China really has shifted quite extraordinarily, one might argue. And now suddenly he talks as if, the two nations are the closest of friends, which of course is an oversimplification.
Well, the leading American presidents in the realm of foreign policy and relations with China have always tried to take the long view, not the short view. President Roosevelt believed in 1945 that China would be a great power, and he was the one who insisted that China be a founding member of the United Nations and of all the international agreements that set the post-World War II order in place. President Nixon came to that point of view when he visited China in 1972. President Reagan, having campaigned against China in his first campaign for the presidency, turned around and embraced a very warm third communique between the United States and China. And so I think you see, presidents who are the capacity to take a longer view of this most important bilateral relationship, today the most important in the world, understand that what these two great powers have to work and have to live together and have to cooperate wherever possible. So I think there is so much negativity in the American Congress, and so much negativity, quite frankly, stirred up by the rhetoric of the first Trump administration about China, that it's important, and I think this visit maybe help that the president will push back on this a bit by his actions, but let us hope also that when he comes home, also by his deeds, and that we will have to wait and see.
Well, William Kirby, thank you so much for joining us on Sky News.
It's been a pleasure to join you.
Well, let's go back now to Dr. Zhao Yukun, who is director of the Institute for Taiwan, Hong Kong and Macau Studies. Dr. Zhao, thank you so much for sticking with us this morning. I wanted to ask you, we've had so many guests on in the past hour talking about the relationship between the US and China and giving their take. And I suppose my question to you is, those opening remarks that we've seen from those two leaders, what do you think that signified to you?
First of all, I think I'm very much impressed by the one phrase that mentioned by President Xi, which is new paradigm of China-US relations. And I think there are several reasons why we think we need a new paradigm. Actually, we have debated about this topic here in Shanghai and in Beijing among the academic community. I think right now the world has changed rapidly. It's very different comparing with the Cold War era. And the technology just developed so fast, so rapidly. We are now facing AI. How to deal with AI, right? The relationship between human and AI, and then the world. Though right now a lot of people, they are opposing to have the super globalization. However, we still should understand all the countries are closely connected with each other. So it's very difficult, for example, for China and the US to decouple with each other. And also there are, besides those sovereign nation states, there are so many non-governmental actors in the current international community. So they are also playing a big role in shape the future of the world, the future of the international order. So the world has changed. And this is the first reason that we need to have a new paradigm for China-US relations, not to copy the model of US-Soviet Union's relationship. The second is right now the power balance between China and the United States has also changed. So a lot of topics on this have been discussed previously by your guests. So I don't want to re-elaborate. So here we need a new paradigm. So I hope that this summit can pave the way for the two sides to go into this direction jointly. And second is I've heard a word from a previous guest that it's about primacy. The US would try to keep its primacy in the world. And personally, I don't like this word. Because I don't think at the current stage, the current world, the United States is able to keep its primacy in Asia Pacific or in other parts of the world. And the word of primacy, I think most comes from the Cold War era. And right now it's very different. And for example, just now, I agree with what Professor William Kirby said a lot. I agree with him. But he also talked about trust but verify, right? During the first Cold War, he used the word first Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union. I would say China is not the second Soviet Union. So China-US relations will be very different comparing with Soviet Union-US relationship.
Okay.
China does not try to build a camp, like to divide the world into two camps, that one is led by the United States, one is led by China.
Okay.
It's not China's approach.
Dr. Zhao,
So, yeah.
we are going to have to leave it there, but we thank you so much for your time. Well, we're going to go back to Beijing with US correspondent James Matthews. James, I don't know if you've managed to hear any of what our guests have been talking about, but one thing I found really interesting from William Kirby, our guest a few minutes ago, was he was talking about the increased unpredictability and volatility of the US and really how China's trying to negotiate that. And I suppose really to an extent that is setting the tone for this meeting, is it not?
Yeah, I think that provides the wider context for all of this, Mari. You have China sitting back and watching developments in the United States, watching fractured alliances, a president who has undermined, to a large extent, the old familiar world order. And China seeks to exploit that. China is presenting itself as the stable steward who can steer the world, the global economy, in a consistent, predictable and more safe way. So, I mean, we see evidence of that, the success of that particular policy. We see Keir Starmer, other world leaders, Mark Carney, making trips to Beijing over the past year, reaching out to the Chinese because they themselves see the uncertainty, the unpredictability of future relations with the United States. So that's where China is right now. It sees an opportunity that it can exploit. And indeed, interestingly, today in the Washington Post, there's an article out that reports how there's a joint intelligence report drawn up by the Americans looking at how the Chinese are exploiting the war on Iran. And it's interesting, it talks about an assessment of the Chinese giving oil to countries in the Gulf, taking care of countries who are suffering as a result of the blockage in the Strait of Hormuz, essentially presenting itself as a stable, dependable partner. And in terms of the geopolitics around the Iran war, it's China playing the long game that exploits American interests. And that's the bigger picture, the shifting of tectonic plates when it comes to the geopolitics and all of this. And China is content to play a long game in all of that. Yes, it sees its future doing business with the Americans, but very much doing business on its terms. And that's what the substance of the negotiations will be around. Trump comes here having to make up some ground, looking for a favor on Iran, which is a weakness for him going into this, having to ask the Chinese for a favor even before they sit down. So huge implications of what comes from these talks. I don't expect any big results quickly. That's perhaps for future meetings. We will get agreements to some degree, Board of Trade, Board of Investment, perhaps. But today it's about building bridges. But be in no doubt, despite the friendly words we've had from both sides, these are two adversaries who sit down in self-interest.
Absolutely. James Matthews, our US correspondent, live for us in Beijing for that invaluable analysis. Now, just if you have been catching up this morning, we've been bringing you live reporting on that meeting between the US President Donald Trump and the Chinese President Xi Jinping. They are currently in a bilateral meeting behind closed doors, but had those opening remarks in which both leaders were very warm in their rhetoric and the way that they spoke about one another. Now, we are going to recap some of our top stories. Donald Trump and Xi Jinping have begun their highly anticipated summit in Beijing with plenty of pomp as the leaders of the two superpowers came together. Now, this is Sky News coming up. The first 6 British passengers from a hantavirus-hit cruise ship have been cleared to return home, where they'll continue their isolation. Nigel Farage will face an investigation by the Common Standards watchdog over a £5 million gift from a donor. The money was given to him by a Thailand-based British cryptocurrency billionaire in early 2024, before he announced he would stand for Parliament. Now, the Reform leader insists the money didn't need to be declared because it was for his own personal security and wasn't political. Well, Sky's deputy political editor Sam Coates explains.
Nigel Farage is potentially facing quite serious trouble. The Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards, effectively the Common Sleaze watchdog, has announced that he is fully investigating the gift that Nigel Farage received, £5 million, just before the 2024 general election from the Thai crypto billionaire Christopher Harborne. Now, this is controversial because the Commons rules say that MPs need to declare all their donations that are made in the 12 months up to them becoming an MP. But Reform UK and Nigel Farage say this isn't a donation, it was a gift given personally with no strings attached from the Thai-based Brit in order to help Nigel Farage with his security. Opposition figures have cried foul, say that Christopher Harborne for years has been a donor to a range of political parties, and, well, Nigel Farage is a politician, so how could it not be a donation? Daniel Greenberg will now consider the case. This all matters because the powers that Daniel Greenberg has, if he finds that Nigel Farage has broken the rules and he decides that this is one of the more serious offences that's come before him, is he could suspend Nigel Farage for 10 days or more. If that happens, then the Reform UK leader could be subjected to a recall petition. That means Clacton residents would be invited to sign if they wanted to get rid of him, and if 10% of those residents of Clacton, voters of Clacton, sign that petition, he would be ejected from Parliament. So potentially, the consequences are quite severe, but Reform UK say they've done nothing wrong, they've checked against the rules, they're delighted that they're going to have an opportunity to put this to bed and that there is not an issue. We shall see in the coming weeks.
Now, health officials say 6 people who were on board a cruise ship at the centre of a hantavirus outbreak are set to leave a Merseyside hospital. They will be expected to isolate for a further 42 days at home or in other suitable accommodation. Well, Sky's Oliver Whitfield-Miocic has the details.
This cruise ship set sail on the 1st of April. Then it got stuck off the coast of Cape Verde, not knowing where they were going to go, then eventually allowed off in Tenerife, come back to the UK, 22 of those passengers self-isolating at Arrow Park. 6 have now been released, but with another 42 days, it means that they're not going to be truly free until the end of June. So it's a 3-month period that these patients will have been sort of self-isolating or on holiday and self-isolating. They've had another negative PCR test. The risk to the public remains low. They've been assessed by clinicians. The UK Health Security Agency keen to stress that none of the cases that have been self-isolating have got any sort of symptoms, and so the risk does remain low. What we're hearing from the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control, though, is even in the passengers who've been self-isolating, that have been quarantining, there is still a risk that there could be further cases just because hantavirus, the incubation period, is quite long. So very low risk, but the health authorities, not only in the UK, in America, right across Europe, are still keeping a close eye on this.
To the US and a murder trial that captured the attention of America, that of Alex Murdaugh. Well, the disgraced former lawyer was sentenced to life in prison 3 years ago for killing his wife and son. It spawned half a dozen TV documentaries, including a Netflix series. Well, now he's been granted a fresh trial in South Carolina. Our US correspondent Mark Stone has the details.
It's a breathtaking moment. It is a remarkable development in a trial which gripped the nation and beyond, in fact. I mean, you mentioned some of the spin-offs that came as a result of a 6-week televised trial. Alex Murdaugh is a prominent attorney from South Carolina. He was very, very well known, not just in South Carolina, but actually beyond as well, and accused in 2021 of murdering his wife Maggie and his 22-year-old son Paul. There was the trial, as I say, in March 2023, dramatic, televised, and he was found guilty of those murders and separately of a number of financial issues of financial wrongdoing too, and sentenced to life in prison. And then the dramatic news that the Supreme Court in the state of South Carolina has overturned the conviction, paving the way for a new trial. Why? Well, because the clerk of the court, a woman called Becky Hill, it is alleged tried to influence the jury. At one stage, she told the jury, "To me, watch his actions, watch him closely." And the jurors took that to mean that she believed that he was guilty. She also said on Judgment Day, this shouldn't take long. At one stage, she gave one of the jurors a ride home. Generally, all of this taken together meant, according to the lawyers of Alex Murdaugh, who pushed for this retrial, they argued that his constitutional right to a fair trial was denied, and in a unanimous decision, the Supreme Court, the highest court in the state of South Carolina, today agreed, and so the conviction was quashed. A retrial will come.
Time for the latest sports news now.
Our new offers are coming through the summer. Came down like last night, done the medical this morning, and delighted.
Eventually, when I did sign him, we had to pay a little bit more money for him, like from 4 million to 12 million, but he was worth every single penny of it.
Aston Villa were ploughing a lot of money into a team to try and get them into the Champions League and try and compete in the top 4. We had a great core of like really good individual players, and we felt like we were equipped to go and challenge.
He was a leader straight away. He was a big voice in the dressing room.
They wanted me, and the hierarchy at Newcastle weren't too convinced in terms of their confidence about giving me a new contract. Kevin Keegan, I think the manager at the time, he was a fantastic player. I was loving my football in front of him and playing well. But you know, the people upstairs had other ideas at the moment, and that was the way it went.
Even a hailstorm couldn't prevent James Milner from practicing free kicks.
He was always questioning players if they haven't put the effort on training. He always believed that you have to train the way you play.
It was like having another coach on the pitch. That's the difference in a player like that. Players who see things, who understand things, but also can give that detail out on the pitch.
I had a captain at the same time called Gareth Barry, and Gareth was quite quiet but led by example, and James was alongside that.
We're pretty similar characters. Where we probably differ is away from the training ground. He's not got a switch. He won't mind me saying this, I don't think he switches off as much as I did.
He's quite intense in terms of information. He'll be talking to people about if he's playing right wing and he wants to know what the right back's doing.
He's a student of the game and goes away and studies it. How does he get better? Body positions, defending.
His demand on the pitch and off the pitch was really high. We were all having a meeting upstairs in the canteen. Everybody just taking their coffees, teas. Rather than the manager, James Milner stand up. He gave us a lecture about how bad we are at training. We were all like, wow.
If we can keep improving, hopefully at some point we can crack that top four.
It's Milner! How about that? A laser-guided finish from James Milner.
Massively underrated. I think a lot of people think of him from a fitness point of view and the fittest player in the Premier League and the man who beats the fitness tests every summer, but it's so much more than that. Technically so good.
He would have, they used to say way back in my day, lived right.
Our pre-season used to be wild, and one of the days we had a day off, so we all went out, we had a couple of drinks. Obviously Matt O'Neill found out that we broke the curfew, and the next day we had to train, and James Milner, because he never came out with us. He was in front of all the runs. He was taking people on. He was
Now, the weather.
I hope we haven't forgotten anything.
Travel insurance, I tick that box.
Yeah, but remember what you forgot last year.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News weather.
Well, the cold northerly flow will continue into the weekend, bringing more showers today, but tomorrow looks much drier. It'll be chilly, but largely frost-free to start the day, with a stiff wind bringing showers to many. But southwestern Scotland and northwestern, central and southeastern England look mainly dry and fairly calm. Now, blistery, locally heavy and possibly thundery showers will develop more widely through the morning, frequent over southwestern Britain as well, but central England will stay dry for much of the time. Temperatures will be well below average again, with the stiff wind making it feel even colder. Ireland, Northern Ireland and the far west of Britain will tend to dry up later, while central Britain will see the showers pepping up with an increasing risk of thundery downpours. And showers will continue near exposed north-facing coasts tomorrow and over southern Britain for a time, but most inland areas will be dry with sunny spells. It'll be cold again after a locally frosty start, but not as windy as recent days. And Saturday will bring some rain to the west.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News weather.
Next on Sky News. Another look at the morning's papers in the wrap.
I bet right now you often find yourself asking why. Why was a certain decision taken? Why did something happen? Why did they say or do that? I'm Neil Patterson, and it's my job as a journalist to find out why. Just explain why.
It's a difficult one.
Well, I mean, it's massive.
It's a very, very severe situation.
So if you want to make sense of this complicated world, Sky News' new podcast, This Is Why, is your daily fix. One story every day, and we can find out why together. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
Now, to a dramatic story out of the Philippines, where more than a dozen gunshots were heard inside the country's Senate building. Well, the shots were heard as authorities moved in to arrest a senator wanted by the International Criminal Court for alleged crimes against humanity. It was not immediately clear who fired the shots. Now, Philippine Senator Ronald de la Rosa had earlier said he was anticipating his arrest and urged people to come to the legislature to prevent him from being detained. He oversaw the crackdown on drugs in the Philippines while he was serving as police chief under the then President Rodrigo Duterte. Now, time for some of the day's other stories. A woman wanted for more than 20 years has been arrested during a 6-month trial of live facial recognition software in South London. During the 6-month pilot, which took place in Croydon, the Metropolitan Police says 173 suspects were arrested for crimes including kidnapping and serious sexual assault. People on weight loss jabs may be able to maintain their weight after finishing treatment by taking a daily pill. Researchers say switching to orforglipron after jabs could be an effective approach to keeping the pounds off. The drug is not yet licensed in the UK, but was approved by the US last month. FBI Director Kash Patel has angrily denied drinking on the job in an extraordinary exchange with the Democratic senator. Now, Patel tried to turn the tables on the lawmaker during questioning, claiming Chris Van Hollen had been slinging margaritas while visiting a wrongly deported inmate in El Salvador.
Is it your testimony that those allegations are categorically false?
Unequivocally, categorically false.
So there have been no occasions during your tenure when FBI personnel were unable to promptly reach you?
Absolutely not. You can ask my entire workforce. They hear from me at every single hour of the day. Unlike your baseless reports, the only person that was slinging margaritas in El Salvador on the taxpayer dollar with a conviction was you.
You know,
the only person that ran up a $7,000 bar tab in Washington, D.C. at the lobby bar was you.
This
so the only individual in this room that has been drinking on taxpayer dime during the day is you.
Gosh, well, now it's time to look at today's papers and some more highlights from the wrap.
Well, it's time now to see what is making the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers. And the front of the Metro reports that the Health Secretary will launch a leadership challenge against Keir Starmer after a 16-minute meeting in Downing Street. Street Fighter is the Sun's headline as the civil war within the Labour Party intensifies. The Daily Mail warns of a day of anarchy in the Labour Party if Wes Streeting launches a leadership challenge. The Star has the headline, Downing Streeting, for its front page splash. The Financial Times says Starmer is rallying around Labour loyalists in a bid to see off any challenge made by Wes Streeting. The Express also reports on the expected leadership challenge and dubs the Prime Minister Zombie Keir. Same story appears in The Guardian. Its headline, Streeting on manoeuvres. Wes Streeting is pictured grinning in the Commons today as he hatches a plan to become Prime Minister. The Health Secretary dominates the front page of The Eye, but it also reports on Andy Burnham's attempt to return to the House of Commons. Reported in the Daily Telegraph that Ed Miliband is ready to fight for the keys to number 10. Nigel Farage receiving a £5 million personal gift from a Thai-based crypto billionaire is called into question. That is the splash on the front of the Mirror. It's also important to say Mr Farage has denied any wrongdoing. So nearly a Streeting clean sweep, Jenny, has to be said. We still don't know if he's going to stand. He certainly did go into Downing Street today, and we know he has been thinking about this for many months.
Yes, he's always been very careful whenever he's asked about it, but I think, you know, everybody knows that he would like to be Prime Minister one day. It's a question of when, and that 16-minute coffee today, quickest coffee in the world, he would have burnt his mouth with that. Who knows what was said in that? But then, of course, he is not going to resign as Health Secretary unless he knows that he's got a good chance of winning the leadership. And we know that, what is it, like 87 backbenchers have asked for... have said that Starmer should go. We don't know if they're all going to support Streeting. Streeting is to the right of the Labour Party. There are a lot of people who are worried. I mean, this is where Ed Miliband's name comes in, that where Streeting is going to challenge for the leadership, then Ed Miliband, who is to the left and who is no fan of Streeting, is more likely to throw his name in the ring.
But that is interesting because Keir Starmer said, and Keir Starmer gets a free pass to stand in the race, right? So Wes Streeting, in order to be eligible, has to get the support of 81 MPs plus 5% of constituency Labour parties plus the support of 3 affiliated organisations, basically trade unions. Now, if he gets that, he's up against Starmer, and the opinion polls of the Labour membership say that Starmer would probably still beat him.
You're presuming that Starmer would fight in a contest?
Starmer said he would, and he's entitled to. Starmer, you know, if Starmer is against Streeting, he would be pretty confident that he would win. Now, what gets really interesting is why would Ed Miliband then go into the contest? Because he's theoretically... you know, a supporter of Starmer and a friend of Starmer. If he goes into the contest, however, he greatly diminishes the chance of Starmer winning because there would obviously be a lot of votes from the left going to him. So I think if Miliband steps forward, it would basically be a declaration of no confidence in Starmer and would probably force Starmer out, and then you'd have a contest that way.
Well, let's jump to the Telegraph. That is the one paper that is suggesting that Ed Miliband will run. I think Mail Online are also doing it as well. Wes Streeting, it says, will fire the starting gun on a 3-way leadership contest with Ed Miliband and Sir Keir Starmer, allies of the Prime Minister believe. So this is allies of the Prime Minister speaking, not, it appears, Ed Miliband's team.
But, you know, this kind of would suggest just how out of touch the Parliamentary Labour Party is with the general public, because there is this feeling that, you know, Keir Starmer does not have the confidence of the public. People don't think he's a good leader. He does actually have a mandate. He did win a general election. Ed Miliband lost a general election. And whilst he's very popular within the Parliamentary Labour Party, he was not popular with voters. And yes, I know that was in 2015. I know that was 11 years ago. But the idea that he's going to galvanise some sort of hope and enthusiasm among the general population, I think is kind of absurd. And it just speaks to the desperation of this contest, that the Parliamentary Labour Party seems to be clutching at straws at looking at who might be better than Keir Starmer, who is the person who has the mandate.
Yeah, but my point is, if Streeting goes in and then Miliband says, right, I'm in, that is a total vote of no confidence in Starmer, and Starmer would more or less have to go anyway, I think, because, you know, the soft left supporters will be saying, we don't back you either. So you've got the soft right supporters and the soft left supporters saying that they want to back other candidates, and that would finish off Starmer. That's all I'm saying. And Ed Miliband is supposed to be a close friend and supporter of Starmer. And incidentally, in the Queen's speech, as Ed Conway has pointed out, you know, they are taking a further step towards net zero by actually bringing in legislation to prevent the option of any further development of the North Sea. So Ed Miliband's getting a lot of what he wants anyway. Why would he want to demolish Starmer unless he thinks Starmer's a goner?
I mean, that was the highlight, wasn't it? That was his, you know, peak success.
The Edstone.
Ironically, the Edstone. I am joking quite clearly at that point. Let's rattle through some more of the newspapers, shall we? Because it's mainly a Wes Streeting gig tonight. The Metro, you know, Wes Prime Minister. Everyone's trying to have a bit of a pun on these.
Some of them are quite good, actually.
Yeah. Well, I know. I bet your favourite's going to be the Sun.
Yeah, I quite like
the
that.
Mail, though. First of all, expected day of anarchy is the Mail's take on this. Streeting to ignite Labour day of anarchy. We'll see how that pans out. There's the Sun, Jenny, for you, Street Fighter.
Quite good.
Yeah, it's quite good. We don't mind that one. And then the Express, finally a move to bring down Zombie Keir. Now, is he... I mean, we've had the King's speech today, but is it effectively a government that can do nothing at the moment? Because what happens if there is a leadership contest and indeed a new leader to all those 37 measures that were announced today and indeed the last 22 months that we've had? Does it get swept away? What happens?
It's still on the agenda, assuming that the Queen's speech is a King's speech. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know.
Is voted through at the end of 5 days of debate. But we could pretty much assume that Labour would do that, and they've still got a large parliamentary majority, so that would be the agenda they would be working to. However, we can assume that Wes Streeting, Ed Miliband, whoever contests the leadership, if they end up doing that, would come up with proposals of things that they would legislate on as well, which they could do because anyone who watched the King today will have heard him say other measures will be laid before you.
Yeah. Quick final papers. The FT, Starmer rallies Labour loyalists in a move to see off Streeting challenge, meeting them in his parliamentary study and sending his allies into the tea room. Some suggest, of course, that he should have done that from the very beginning, and that was part of the problem. He didn't get to know his Labour MPs. And then the Star as well, here we go again, says Larry the Cat, who's on his 350th Prime Minister in the last... I'm joking. There's been a lot.
Seven,
exactly that.
Yes.
Exactly that. And just going back, in fact, to the Daily Express, a picture there of the Princess of Wales on her first foreign trip in Italy, returning to royal tours for the first time in 3 years in what was described as a significant moment where she was there trying to find details about early years development of children, something that she's clearly worked on for the last decade. Childhood development really critical for her.
Yes, great to see that she's well enough to go travelling and doing her work. And, you know, it's great that she's... Apparently this particular part of Italy has some innovative ideas about childhood development and learning through play and all sorts of things. I don't know. I would kind of love it if we had female members of the royal family doing things that were causes that are a bit less traditionally female coded than early years children's education. But I'm glad that she's well enough, and I'm glad that she's off doing things, even though it's not particularly gritty.
Well, she also, according to the Telegraph, she spoke Italian. Io sono Caterina.
Catherine. Yes,
yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Oh, OK. Adam, I know, is fluent in French because you once live translated something when our translation went down.
Wow.
And I think many people would say early years is absolutely fundamental to the person's life from that moment on.
It's incredibly important, and it's important work to be doing, yes.
Yes, OK.
First Minister, how are you?
Good morning. Good morning.
Nice to see you.
How are you feeling? Looking forward to getting into the parliamentary chamber.
Are you any further forward to making a decision?
I'm not. No, it's an important day today.
All of the claims were in line with my parliamentary duties, so I'm making that clear to you, Conor.
He was a Scot through and through.
He was a very good politician.
Alex Salmond was controversial, he was a disruptor, but above all, he was respected.
Will you resign if you lose this week?
Again, I'm not planning to, of course, lose the vote of no confidence. I'm planning to win that vote of no confidence.
His face said it all.
My intention to stand down as party leader.
This is now a storm with deadly consequences. How are they feeling?
They're a bit scared at the minute.
We've been told to evacuate.
How are you feeling?
Devastated.
Hundreds of homes were wiped out by flooding. I'm Conor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent.
It was probably the darkest time in my life.
Scott is 5 years sober after a cocaine addiction left him close to death.
Scotland has a shameful record, worse than England, the worst in Europe.
So why not just say you failed? Because then you might get more respect from families who've lost loved ones.
This is where one of the UK's most prolific rapists thought he'd got away with murder.
Sky News can reveal that former sex workers had told police he was sexually violent.
My Emma.
Free wherever you get your news.
It's over, isn't it?
The Americans say he is Rossi, a fraudster.
This has been one of the most bizarre cases ever heard in a courtroom in this country.
A dangerous murderer.
Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive Andrew Innes after this?
She said she can forgive him, but as long as he's behind bars.
By doing the right thing, it's destroyed your life.
They terrorised me, they intimidated me.
I'm so grateful.
Sky News, the full story first.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
What country are you
From the UK.
Okay, we don't give a crap about your opinion and your reporting. Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Israel has qualified for the Eurovision Song Contest final, despite the country's participation dividing opinion following the war in Gaza, with 5 countries, including Ireland, boycotting this year's event. Now, that unrest continued as Israel's entry, Noam Betan, was met with the chants of "Stop the Genocide" before his performance. Well, our arts and entertainment correspondent Katie Spencer sent this report from the semi-final in Vienna.
Israel is now through to the Eurovision final, but look, it could be a deeply uncomfortable watch. Here in Vienna, from the get-go, all eyes have been on Noam Betan, Israel's entrant, but before he'd even sung a note, the mood inside of there changed. There were lots of Israeli flags that came out, lots of shouts in favour of Israel, but there were also Palestine flags, and there were also a couple of protesters. Take a look at this footage that was given to Sky News by a fan who filmed 2 protesters and security moving in afterwards.
There were 2 tubes of glue on the floor, and there is actually a handprint on the barrier, so they clearly had glued themselves, probably got yanked off before the glue. You know what it's like trying to set super glue, you can never do it. So obviously they got removed before that came off. But he was reluctant to go. I mean, they came in to take him away, and he threw himself on the ground, and they literally dragged him away.
Israel got enough votes to qualify, and Israel's inclusion, of course, has been controversial. They've had boycotts, there's been TV blackouts with Ireland, Spain, Netherlands, Slovenia and Iceland all arguing that how it's conducted its war in Gaza means that it shouldn't be here. And earlier I spoke to the director of Eurovision, Martin Breen, and asked him whether or not he had any regrets about the fact that Israel's here.
None at all. And again, this is where we always point out, it's public service broadcasters that participate in Eurovision. They're not participated in by governments, and our view is that artists and public service broadcasters don't represent necessarily the views of their governments.
All around this arena, security absolutely couldn't be any tighter, with street protests planned in the days ahead. I think it says a lot about the mood here, though, that while there were plenty cheering for Israel, on the ground next to where those protesters were arrested, there was glue found. I think there is a very small and very vocal number of people that are in town that are intent to make trouble at this year's Eurovision.
And we'll finish this hour with pictures from Windsor Castle, where online safety campaigner Ellen Rome has been honoured. Well, Ellen is a tireless campaigner for restrictions on social media for under-16s after her 14-year-old son, Jules, died in 2022. Now, Ellen believes Jules died after an online challenge went wrong. She received an MBE for services to children's online safety, and afterwards she revealed what Prince William said to her.
He asked me whether it was following the loss of my son and that the harms children are seeing online, and if he offered to help in any way he could. Obviously very relevant for him with his children, and children are seeing harmful things online which we need to change. And the government need to step up and do more once this consultation's finished, and I'll be on their case. I didn't do it for this. I did this to make a difference. I don't have any other children I can save, but I can make a difference to the rest of the children in the world. And so whether that's here in the UK, or I quite often go abroad these days, we need to make a difference for everybody. This is a global problem, and we need to step up and really make a difference.
Now, let's have a look at the weather.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean All Clear Skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News weather.
The cold northerly flow will continue into the weekend, bringing more showers today, but tomorrow looks much drier. Now, it'll be chilly, but largely frost-free to start the day, with a stiff wind bringing showers to many. But southwestern Scotland and northwestern, central and southeastern England look mainly dry and fairly calm. Blustery, locally heavy and possibly thundery showers will develop more widely through the morning, frequent over southwestern Britain, but central England will stay dry for much of the time. Now, temperatures will be well below average again, with a stiff wind making it feel even colder.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News Weather.
This is Sky News, the headlines. The US president receives red carpet treatment as he meets the Chinese leader in Beijing, beginning a cultural summit.
President Xi, I want to thank you very much. First of all, that was an honor like few have ever seen before.
What did you say to the Prime Minister?
Did you ask the Prime Minister to resign?
Also this hour, Streeting poised to strike. His allies tell Sky News he'll resign and challenge the Prime Minister.
You all know what he's been up to. You know.
Stony faces on the government benches, but Starmer is hanging on, meeting ministers in his parliamentary study and urging them not to plunge the party into chaos.
In difficult days, her input is always a ray of sunshine.
Good morning. Well, the highly anticipated meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping is now underway, with both leaders meeting to talk through a range of issues. Now, the future of Taiwan, Iran, AI and tariffs are just the start of what will be discussed. Well, the moment arrived as Trump pulled up in his armoured Cadillac, the Beast, adorned with the flags of both countries. And any feelings of hostility didn't show. Chinese President Xi Jinping extended his arm to offer his US counterpart a friendly handshake and an exchange of small talk. In perhaps a hint as to what's on the agenda, Trump inspected Chinese military honour guards alongside Xi Jinping, and the US delegation will likely see help to secure an exit from the Iran war with Tehran's allies in Beijing. Well, Trump said he was impressed by the welcome he received from school children who jumped up and down in an excitement while waving flags as the US president walked past. And he later remarked that the performance was amazing. A spectacular ceremonial welcome from the military then followed, giving the talks a touch of pomp. And the pair then looked out from the top of the stairs of the Great Hall over Tiananmen Square before entering to begin bilateral talks where they exchanged warm remarks.
This year is the 250th anniversary of American independence. Congratulations to you and to the American people. I always believe that our two countries have more common interests than differences. Success in one is an opportunity for the other, and a stable bilateral relationship is good for the world. China and the United States both stand to gain from cooperation and lose from confrontation. We should be partners, not rivals. We should help each other succeed and prosper together and find the right way for major countries to get along well with each other in the new era. Mr. President, I look forward to our discussions on major issues important to our two countries and the world, and working together with you to set the course for and steer the giant ship of China-US relations so as to make 2026 a historic landmark year that opens up a new chapter in China-US relations. I will pause here and hand over to you, Mr. President. Thank you.
Well, President Xi, I want to thank you very much. First of all, that was an honor like few have ever seen before. And I think I was particularly impressed by those children. They were happy. They were beautiful. The military is obvious. It couldn't be better, but those children were amazing, and they represent so much. And I know they represent so much to you. You and I have known each other now for a long time. In fact, the longest relationship of our two countries that any president and president has had. And that's, to me, an honor. We've had a fantastic relationship. We've gotten along. When there were difficulties, we worked it out. I would call you, and you would call me. And whenever we had a problem, people don't know, whenever we had a problem, we worked it out very quickly. We're going to have a fantastic future together. Such respect for China, the job you've done. You're a great leader. I say it to everybody. You're a great leader. Sometimes people don't like me saying it, but I say it anyway because it's true. I only say the truth. And I just want to say on behalf of all of the great delegation that we have the greatest businessmen, the biggest, and I guess the best in the world. We have amazing people, and they're all with me. Every single one of them, we asked the top 30 in the world, every single one of them said yes. And I didn't want the second or the third in the company. I wanted only the top. And they're here today to pay respects to you and to China. And they look forward to trade and doing business. And it's going to be totally reciprocal on our behalf. So I really look very much forward to our discussion. It's a big discussion. There are those that say this is maybe the biggest summit ever. They can never remember anything like it. I can say in the United States, people aren't talking about anything else. But it's an honor to be with you. It's an honor to be your friend. And the relationship between China and the USA is going to be better than ever before. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, let's go to our US correspondent, James Matthews, in Beijing, who is joined by our Asia correspondent, Helen Smith. Now, anyone who's been watching the two of you's reporting is going to be gutted not to see you on bicycles.
Yeah, most exercise I've had in a long time, Mary, I can tell you.
And this time we're smart, we're in our suits,
Yeah.
We're ready for the big day.
Yeah, still recovering. But listen, quite a morning, wasn't it? Donald Trump, around about an hour ago, I was at the airport last night. Similar scenes, actually, certainly in terms of the welcome, the military, music played, students waving the American and Chinese flags, and we saw something similar this morning in Tiananmen Square. You're the Beijing correspondent, Helen Ann. Have you seen anything like that for a visiting VIP?
So we have, but that definitely what we saw this morning constitutes sort of the top level of the sort of Chinese ceremonial welcome, if that makes sense. You know, they're quite careful, the Chinese. They plan these things and they think very carefully about exactly what type of level of welcome certain leaders of certain status might expect. But look, that's the top. It's not like he's the only person who's ever got it, of course. I think President Macron, when he came last year, had something similar. The King of Spain was here not that long ago. Again, quite similar. But look, they didn't hold back on sort of the pomp, the ceremony. And look, I'm sure you and everyone else noticed just the attention to detail. Even the music was timed perfectly with the steps between the car and the handshakes. You know, and then they came round and they inspected the soldiers. But we said, didn't we, that Trump was maybe walking a bit too quickly.
That's right, yeah, for the guy by his side, doing the goose steps. I was interested in the location, actually, Tiananmen Square in 1989. There was a massacre there, and Trump would have driven down the very street, Chang'an Avenue.
Chang'an, yeah, sorry.
The very one where Tank Man stood with his plastic bag. So a haunted history, but I suppose this is very much about the present. And I think that ceremony flattered Trump. I think the Chinese have watched and learned how to operate with the US president. He was full of flattery. We heard it there. You know, that liberal, lyrical hype, talking about the great relationship. I mean, for me, the body language, there was no hug. Firm handshake, which I suppose was a reminder that this is a strictly business trip.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think actually you talk about the location, as you say, that haunted history, but that Great Hall of the People, that huge ceremonial location that President Trump was welcomed into. I mean, that was built in the 1950s. It was sort of one of Chairman Mao's biggest sort of infrastructure projects at the time. And the statement of that building when it was built and now, it is all about shock and awe. It is about the scale of Chinese power. It is about the future of the communist rule of this country. And I think it does make a statement, doesn't it? Just that building, its sheer size, its sheer enormity. I'm lucky enough to have been in it a few times, and it's impressive. But actually on the body language, I should just mention, you know, Xi Jinping is a difficult man to read. You know, I work hard trying to read him day in, day out. He's a difficult man to read, but he's often very stony-faced in these meetings, even with allies. He is quite stiff, but I actually think, on balance, he looked relatively relaxed this morning, I think. There was one moment I noticed where he sort of just touched Donald Trump's arm. I mean, Trump was the one with the sort of more overt kind of tactile gestures, but, you know, I think on balance, he's pleased. I think he's on balance enjoying this, pleased to have him there, and I think that was reflected in some of the opening words as well.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because, you know, Donald Trump, businessman, I mean, that's the way he operates. It's the way that American business is done, actually, you know, that kind of effusive praise, the flattery. I wondered how that landed with the Chinese for a kickoff. But also, what did you think of what Xi had to say? That phrase, that word starts with a TH. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, but you are, yeah?
Thucydides' trap.
The very
we'll
one.
Talk about it. So yeah, look, firstly, to answer the first thing that you said, you know, Trump went off script, didn't he, during that opening? Yeah. You know, he went off script to talk about the children that he saw at the welcoming, and he said one moment, I thought, that will make the Chinese cringe. He's like, oh, I think you're a great leader, but, you know, people don't like me saying that, but I say it anyway, you know? The Chinese, everything is so scripted, it is so carefully contrived, that even those moments that feel in American culture like a quip might accidentally translate as a sort of lack of respect in Chinese culture. So, difficult to say exactly how that was read. But look, in Xi Jinping's opening, as you said, look, he trotted out some of the sort of lines that we've heard quite a lot of times before. The US-China, the great ship of US-China relations, it's up to us to steady them. And, he really sort of nodded towards the sort of historic importance of this moment, sort of once in 100-year change, and the future of humanity depends on what we do here. But as you said, he brought up what's called the Thucydides trap. Look, I'm stumbling over it as well.
You
now.
regret it now.
Yeah, I know. I regret saying that I would talk about it. Bit of a question over whether Trump even knew what that was. But anyway, what it essentially is it's a sort of it's a kind of a metaphor to talk about a kind of a newer, upcoming power threatening an existing larger power, and that balance might tip into sort of conflict and disagreement. And what Xi Jinping said in that speech is that we can transcend the Thucydides trap. So what he's saying is that we are an upcoming power, and you should not be threatened by us. That's his key message, and that really gets to the sort of depth of sort of Chinese sort of insecurities, maybe not quite the right word, but certainly sort of sensitivities around America. They truly believe that decades of US policy has been actively trying to hold them back, that the US truly believe that they cannot coexist as great powers together, that one has to dominate the other. And look, China has spent many years, many decades saying, look, we're not your subordinate, we are your equal. We could even be the leading global superpower. And remember, that's the message that's really going to underpin everything Xi Jinping does this week.
Yeah, this meeting, of course, still going on. We have a clue as to how it's going from some of the people present, some of the tech bros that travelled with Donald Trump. They left early. Elon Musk, Jensen Huang, Tim Cook spotted leaving the Great Hall of the People. Musk was asked by reporters how it's going. Wonderful, he said. Many good things. Tim Cook gave a peace sign, then the thumbs up, which presumably means it's all going fine. And Jensen Huang, meetings went well. Mr. Xi and President Trump were incredible. I suppose we'll hear from the principals in due course. Much more to come from us here in Beijing throughout the day.
Well, thank you very much, James Matthews and Helen Ann Smith. They'll be live for us from Beijing for this historic visit. Now, I'm joined by... Here we are. I'm joined by Dr. Zhao Yuken. Thank you so much for sticking with us all morning. She's the director of the Institute for Taiwan, Hong Kong and Macau Studies. Just to kind of wrap up now, what's your take on how this has gone? And so far, obviously, it's very, very early days. Do you think that the Chinese will be pleased with how this has at least begun?
Yeah, I think the tone of the beginning of this trip of President Trump is very positive. The Chinese side have been very welcome to President Trump to visit Beijing. I think it's the Chinese way to welcome a very important guest from a very important country. So this is the first thing. The second is when I read President Xi's remarks at the beginning of his meeting with President Trump, I think he has repeated several lines of Chinese government's position. I hope that the people, the analysts, the policymakers in Washington can really pay attention to these words, not to understand it as a kind of a performance politics sometimes. It's the Chinese real thinking of their wish that they can have a peaceful and a stable relationship with the United States. Because just like President Xi said, no winner in the trade war. Certainly, it's not in the interest of the United States. The current situation in the U.S. has shown that the tariff war has failed. It's not good for the U.S. People, and also I think the remarks of President Xi has shown that China does not want to have confrontation with the United States. We want peaceful coexistence, but China does not fear to have confrontation with the biggest power in the world. And so last year, after the Trump administration launched the so-called reciprocal war, tariff war against China, I think China was kind of one of the two countries who really fight back. And so right now we are in a position that China feels more confident than before. And so this is important. And by the way, I would also want to emphasize that don't look at China-US relationship still from a kind of a Thucydides trap view. And also it's a kind of a rising power, established power. I would say so far, all these kind of comments and analysis is from a Western-centered international relations theory or international order. China is very different. China is a civilization country. China is in the east part of the world. Our culture, our history is very different. So I don't think that China-US relationship, the future of this bilateral relationship will be a kind of a repeat of US-Japan relations, US-Soviet Union relationship. China-US relationship just will be very, very different. And since it's one of the most important bilateral relationship for the world in the next several decades, I think we have to think about the new paradigm. But whether we can do it or not, we just don't know. It's still a question mark. I would say it's very very difficult.
Dr. Zhao.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.